When 28-year-old diesel mechanic Riley Foster agreed to help her elderly neighbor clean out his decrepit barn for $200, she expected nothing more than a weekend of hauling junk and breathing dust. But hidden beneath decades of hay bales and rusted farm equipment sat a 1943 Willys MB Jeep, and welded inside its frame, a waterproof case containing documents that would expose an 80-year military cover-up, destroy a decorated general's legacy, and force the Pentagon to confront the truth about what really happened to the Ghost Battalion of Normandy. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if stories like this grab you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I've got something that'll blow your mind even more. The autumn wind cut through Mercer's Hollow, Montana, carrying the scent of early snow from the Bitterroot Mountains. Riley Foster wiped a streak of diesel fuel from her forearms as she surveyed the empty parking lot of Foster and Daughter Diesel Repair, the shop her late father had built with his own hands and she'd been desperately trying to keep alive for the past 3 years. 28 years old, vocational school graduate, certified diesel mechanic, and drowning in $63,000 of business debt that felt like an anchor around her neck. The shop sat on the edge of Mercer's Hollow, a town of barely 3,000 souls that was slowly bleeding residents as young people fled to Missoula or Bozeman seeking opportunities that no longer existed in rural Montana. Riley locked the heavy roll-up door of the main garage bay, the metallic clang echoing across the empty lot. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Friday evening in late October, and she'd seen exactly 4 customers all day. 2 oil changes, 1 brake job, and old Mrs. Kellerman's pickup that just needed the gas cap tightened, a repair Riley couldn't bring herself to charge for. The numbers didn't lie. Foster and Daughter was dying the same slow death as the town itself. Her father, Marcus Foster, had been a legend in these parts. Army mechanic turned civilian diesel expert, the man who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it idle. He'd built this business from nothing, earning trust through honest work and fair prices. When truckers broke down on Highway 93, they called Marcus Foster. When ranchers needed equipment repaired, they brought it to Marcus Foster. When the school district's bus fleet needed maintenance, Marcus Foster got the contract. Then 3 years ago, at age 58, Marcus Foster had a massive heart attack while replacing the transmission on a logging truck. Dead before the ambulance arrived. And Riley, fresh out of technical college with her diesel certification and a head full of her father's teachings, had inherited not just the business but the impossible task of filling boots that were too big for anyone to fill. She'd tried. God knows she'd tried. But being Marcus Foster's daughter didn't automatically transfer his decades of reputation. Didn't matter that she could tear down a Cummins engine and rebuild it blindfolded. Didn't matter that she'd scored in the top 5% of her certification class. What mattered to many of the old-timers in Mercer's Hollow was that she was 25 years old and female when she took over, and neither of those facts inspired confidence in men who'd spent their lives believing that real mechanics had grease under their fingernails and testosterone in their veins. The first year, she'd operated on inherited goodwill and her father's existing contracts. The second year, those contracts started going to competitors in Kalispell and Polson, bigger shops with more mechanics, newer equipment, and without the risk of relying on a young woman. The third year, this year, had been a slow-motion disaster. Riley walked to her pickup truck, a 1995 Ford F-250 diesel that her father had rebuilt when she turned 16. The truck was older than some of her tools, but it ran perfectly because Riley maintained it the way her father had taught her, with attention, respect, and regular preventive care. She sat in the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened her banking app, forcing herself to confront the reality she'd been avoiding all week. Business checking account, $1,247.32. Mortgage payment due in 6 days, $2,800. She had a few outstanding invoices that might bring in another $800 before the end of the month, but that still left her more than $700 short. And that didn't count utilities, insurance, or the fact that she needed to eat occasionally. The second mortgage, the one her father had taken out to expand the shop 5 years before he died, was the real killer. The bank had been understanding after his death, working with Riley to restructure payments, but understanding only went so far. She'd already received 2 formal notices about her delinquent status. One more missed payment and they'd start foreclosure proceedings. Riley closed the banking app and opened her text messages instead. The most recent was from her mother, sent 3 hours ago from Phoenix. "Honey, I know you don't want to hear this, but you need to think seriously about selling. Your father would understand. He'd want you to be happy, not buried in debt. Call me. Love you." Her mother had moved to Arizona within 6 months of her father's death, unable to bear the memories that saturated every corner of Mercer's Hollow. She'd found work as a medical receptionist, started dating a retired math teacher, and had gently but persistently suggested that Riley do the same, sell the shop, move somewhere with opportunities, start fresh. The rational part of Riley's brain knew her mother was probably right. She was 28 years old, skilled, certified, and could get hired at any diesel shop in any city in America. She could walk away from the debt, from the struggling business, from the weight of trying to preserve her father's legacy. But every time she seriously considered it, she'd remember the way her father's face lit up when she successfully diagnosed her first major engine problem at age 14. The pride in his voice when she got her certification. The way he'd put his hand on her shoulder and said, "You've got the gift, Riley girl. You understand machines the way most people understand people. That's rare. That's valuable. Don't let anyone tell you different." How do you walk away from that? Riley finally started the truck, the diesel engine rumbling to life with the distinctive clatter that most people found annoying but that had always sounded like home to her. She was about to pull out of the lot when she saw a figure walking up the road toward the shop. Harold Brennan, moving slowly with the careful steps of a man whose body no longer quite obeyed his will. The unexpected visitor. Riley killed the engine and climbed out of the truck. Harold Brennan was 89 years old, Korean War veteran, widower, and the owner of the 40-acre property that adjoined her shop. He'd been her father's best friend. The 2 men had served together in the Army back in the late 70s, bonding over engines and a shared belief that honest work was its own reward. Harold had been there at her father's funeral, standing ramrod straight despite his age, saluting the casket with tears streaming down his weathered face. And 2 weeks later, when the bank had initially refused Riley's application to assume her father's business loan, Harold had walked into the Mercer's Hollow Community Bank and offered to co-sign, putting his own property up as collateral. "Marcus Foster was the best friend I ever had," Harold had told the bank manager in a tone that brooked no argument. "And his daughter's got his talent and twice his determination. I'm betting on Riley Foster, and if you're too damn short-sighted to do the same, that's your failure, not hers." The bank had approved the loan. Which meant that Riley's failure wasn't just her own, it was also a betrayal of Harold's faith in her. "Riley. Got a minute?" Harold called out, slightly breathless from the walk. "Harold, what are you doing walking all the way out here?" Riley hurried over to him. "You should have called. I would have come to you." "I'm 89, not 189, Harold replied with a trace of his old humor. "Doctor says walking is good for me. Keeps the blood moving." He paused to catch his breath. "Besides, I wanted to talk to you about something, and I wanted to do it face to face." Riley felt a spike of anxiety. Had Harold heard about her financial troubles? Was he worried about his co-signature on the loan? "Let's go inside where it's warm," she suggested, unlocking the shop's side door that led to the small office area. The office was cramped but organized, a desk covered with invoices and parts catalogs, an ancient desktop computer that took 3 minutes to boot up, a mini fridge that hummed loudly, and walls covered with her father's collection of vintage tool advertisements and military unit patches. Harold settled into the worn leather chair that had been Marcus Foster's favorite, letting out a small sigh of relief as his weight came off his legs. "How are you doing, Riley?" he asked, his blue eyes sharp despite his age. "And I mean really doing. None of that fine, just fine nonsense you give everyone else." Riley started to offer exactly that kind of deflection, then stopped. This was Harold. He deserved honesty. "I'm drowning," she admitted, the words coming out more emotional than she'd intended. I'm 6 days from missing a mortgage payment. I've got maybe 3 months before the bank starts foreclosure, and I'm starting to think everyone was right, that I'm not cut out for this.
Bullshit, Harold said with unexpected force.
You're exactly cut out for this. You're a better mechanic than your father was at your age, and that's saying something. This town is dying, Riley. That's not your fault. You're trying to run a business in a place where there's not enough business to run.
Then maybe I should sell, Riley said quietly.
Take whatever equity is left and start over somewhere else.
Harold was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable.
Is that what you want? He asked finally. Or is that what you think you're supposed to want?
The question hit harder than Riley expected.
She didn't have a good answer.
I came here to ask you for help, Harold said, changing the subject.
My daughter Carolyn is finally putting her foot down about me living alone.
Says I can't handle another Montana winter by myself, says I'm moving to that assisted living place in Billings whether I like it or not.
I'm sorry, Harold, Riley said, and meant it.
Harold had lived on that property for over 60 years.
Don't be.
She's probably right. I can't climb stairs like I used to, can't shovel snow, can't do half the things I need to do to maintain a property.
He paused.
But I need help clearing out my barn before the move. There's a lot accumulated in there over the years. I'm prepared to pay you $200 if you can handle it this weekend. Haul everything to the dump, or keep anything you think you can use or sell.
Riley's immediate instinct was to refuse payment.
Harold had already done so much for her, but she caught herself. He was offering her work, offering her the dignity of being paid for her labor. Refusing would be insulting.
I can do that, she said.
Saturday and Sunday work for you?
Perfect.
Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out a ring of old keys, setting them on the desk.
These open the barn.
I haven't been inside in, honestly, probably 15 years. My back won't let me do the kind of physical work it'll take to clear it out.
Riley picked up the keys, noting their age.
These weren't modern copies, but originals, worn smooth by decades of use.
I've never actually seen inside your barn, she admitted.
It's always been locked up tight.
What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Farm equipment? Tools? Something flickered across Harold's face, an emotion Riley couldn't quite read.
Sadness, maybe.
Or fear.
A little of everything, he said carefully.
Farm equipment, old furniture, boxes of who knows what. My brother Thomas's belongings. Just a lot of history that probably should have been dealt with a long time ago. Riley remembered Harold's brother vaguely from stories her father had told. Thomas Brennan had been a World War II veteran, one of the soldiers who'd landed at Normandy on D-Day. He'd come home after the war, worked as a ranch hand, and died by suicide in the late 1950s. Her father had always spoken of Thomas with a kind of reverent sadness, the way you talk about someone whose demons had finally caught up with them.
I'll take care of it, Riley assured him.
And Harold, thank you. For the work, and for everything. I know the shop is struggling, and I know that puts your co-signature at risk. I'm trying to fix it. Harold stood slowly, using the arms of the chair for support. Marcus always said you had his gift for mechanics. But you've got something he didn't, you've got his stubbornness combined with your mother's strategic thinking. Don't sell yourself short, Riley. Something's going to break your way. I can feel it. After Harold left, Riley sat alone in the office, turning the ring of barn keys over in her hands. $200 wouldn't solve her problems, but it would buy groceries and maybe keep the lights on for another month. And if there was anything salvageable in Harold's barn, tools, equipment, metal that could be scrapped, every little bit helped. She locked up the shop, drove home to her small rental house on the edge of town, ate a depressing dinner of ramen noodles and canned vegetables, and spent the evening researching barn cleanout strategies on her laptop. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, with that peculiar quality of October light that promised winter wasn't far behind. Riley loaded her truck with heavy-duty work gloves, industrial trash bags, a wheelbarrow, basic hand tools, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint.
Harold's property was only a 5-minute drive from her house. The main residence was a modest ranch house built in the 1960s, showing its age but well-maintained. Behind the house, perhaps 200 yards back, sat the barn. Riley had driven past this property thousands of times in her life, but she'd never really looked at the barn with attention. Now, parking her truck nearby, she studied it with a mechanic's eye for detail. It was enormous, had to be at least 60 feet long and 40 feet wide, with a gambrel roof that rose a good 30 feet at its peak. The structure looked old, probably dating to the 1940s or 50s, constructed of weathered wood planks that had been red once but had faded to a rusty brown. What struck Riley as odd was the windows. There were 8 of them, 4 on each side, but all had been painted black from the inside, making it impossible to see into the structure. And the doors, massive sliding doors on the front, probably 12 feet wide, were secured not with a simple padlock but with 3 separate heavy-duty locks, plus a chain wrapped multiple times around the door handles. This wasn't just a locked barn. This was a secured barn. This was a barn keeping secrets. Riley approached slowly, the ring of keys heavy in her hand. She could hear the wind whistling through gaps in the barn's siding, and somewhere inside, something metallic was tapping irregularly, moved by drafts. The locks were old and corroded, fighting her efforts to turn the keys. The first lock finally surrendered with a screech of metal on metal. The second took 5 minutes of wiggling and cursing. The third required Riley to spray it with penetrating oil and wait before it would budge. Finally, the chain came free, coiling onto the ground with a heavy clattering sound. Riley grabbed the massive door handle and pulled. The door resisted, stuck on its track after years of disuse, but eventually yielded. As it slid open, decades of trapped air rushed out, carrying the smell of old hay, motor oil, dust, and something else. Something like secrets kept too long. The interior was dark despite the morning light, those painted windows blocking most natural illumination. Riley clicked on her heavy-duty flashlight and stepped inside. "Holy shit," she whispered. The barn was absolutely packed. Mountains of hay bales, now compressed and darkened with age, filled one entire corner. Old farm equipment, plows, harrows, a vintage tractor, occupied another section. Stacks of wooden crates, furniture covered with stained tarps, barrels of who knows what, and layer upon layer of accumulated rural life from multiple decades. This wasn't going to be a weekend job. This was going to be a week minimum, maybe 2. Riley began methodically, starting with the items nearest the door. Most of it was junk, rotted furniture, boxes of moldy paperwork, farm tools rusted beyond repair. She filled trash bag after trash bag, loading them into her truck for runs to the county dump. Hours passed. The work was physically exhausting, and the dust was thick enough to make her grateful for the respirator mask she'd brought. By noon, she'd barely made a dent in the barn's contents, having cleared maybe 10% of the front section. She took a break, sitting on her truck's tailgate and eating the sandwich she'd packed, looking back at the barn with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. What had Harold's brother been storing in here? Why had Harold left it untouched for so long? After lunch, Riley attacked the hay bales, using a pitchfork to break them apart and cart the ancient, compressed hay to a growing pile outside. The hay practically disintegrated when disturbed, creating clouds of dust that made her grateful for her mask. It was while clearing the third row of hay bales, now working deeper into the barn, that she saw it. Hidden behind the hay, covered with a tarp so thick with dust and debris it looked like part of the barn itself, was the unmistakable angular shape of a vehicle. Riley's heart rate picked up. She worked faster, clearing away the remaining hay bales, coughing despite her mask as decades of accumulated dust filled the air. She grabbed the edge of the tarp and pulled. The fabric practically disintegrated in her hands, ancient canvas giving way after decades of decay. As it fell away, Riley found herself staring at something she'd only seen in history books and war movies. A 1943 Willys MB Jeep. The classic World War II military vehicle sat there like a time capsule, its olive drab paint faded but recognizable, its body showing the expected rust and wear of 80 years but surprisingly intact. The canvas top was long gone, but the windshield mounts were still in place. And there, on the hood, barely visible under the dust, was a white star, the marking of U.S. Army vehicles during World War II. "Oh my God," Riley breathed, circling the vehicle slowly. She'd seen restored Jeeps at car shows and military museums, but she'd never been this close to an original, unrestored World War II vehicle. The detail was incredible: the jerrycan mounts, the shovel bracket, the Pioneer tools, the tow hooks. Everything was exactly as it would have been when this Jeep rolled off the assembly line in 1943. Riley pulled out her phone and quickly searched for 1943 Willis MB value. The results made her eyes widen. Restored examples were selling for $30,000 to $50,000 depending on condition and documentation. Even an unrestored Jeep in rough condition could fetch $15,000 to $20,000 from the right collector. This could save her business. But even as that mercenary thought crossed her mind, Riley felt something else, a connection to this vehicle, to its history. This Jeep had been to war. It had quite possibly rolled onto the beaches of Normandy, carried soldiers through the hell of combat, and somehow survived to come home. Harold's brother Thomas had driven this Jeep. Had brought it back from Europe somehow. And for reasons Riley didn't yet understand, he'd hidden it in this barn and made Harold promise to keep it locked away. She examined the vehicle more closely with her mechanic's eye. The body showed rust, particularly on the floor panels and lower quarter panels, but the frame looked surprisingly solid. The engine was there, a Willis Go Devil 4-cylinder, though obviously not functional after 80 years of sitting. The tires had long ago rotted away, leaving the Jeep sitting on its rims. But it was restorable. Definitely restorable. As Riley walked around to the passenger side, running her hand along the body, she noticed something odd. There were weld marks along the bottom of the frame rail, fresh welds, or at least newer welds, not original to the vehicle. She knelt down, shining her flashlight underneath. Someone had welded a metal box into the frame itself. Riley's pulse quickened. The box was roughly 12 inches by 18 inches, made of what looked like steel plate, and had been carefully integrated into the frame in a way that wouldn't be visible unless you specifically looked for it. The welds were good, professional work, probably done by someone with military welding experience. This was what Thomas had been hiding. This was why the Jeep had been locked away for decades. Riley stood up, her mind racing. She needed to call Harold, needed to tell him what she'd found. But first, she needed to document everything. She took photos of the Jeep from every angle, close-ups of the welded box, shots of the interior and engine compartment. As she was photographing the driver's side, she noticed something tucked behind the seat, a worn leather satchel, somehow protected from the worst of the barn's decay by its position inside the vehicle. Riley carefully pulled it out, noting its weight. Something was definitely inside. She opened it carefully. Inside was a military-issue journal, its pages yellowed but intact, in a small metal case about the size of a cigar box. The journal's first page had a name written in neat handwriting: Corporal Thomas J. Brennan, 29th Infantry Division, 116th Infantry Regiment. The 116th Infantry Regiment. Riley knew that designation from history classes. That was one of the units that had landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, one of the units that had suffered catastrophic casualties in the first hours of the invasion. With trembling hands, Riley opened the journal and began to read. June 7, 1944. We're alive, but most of the company isn't. Never thought I'd make it off that beach. Never thought anyone would. What happened yesterday was beyond any nightmare I could have imagined. But that's not the worst of it. What I saw today, what I discovered in that abandoned German bunker, Jesus Christ, what are we supposed to do with this? Riley kept reading, page after page of cramped handwriting that told a story she'd never heard in any history class. A story of a platoon that had become separated from their unit during the chaos after D-Day. A story of a discovery that should have been impossible. A story that explained why this Jeep had been hidden for 80 years. As the afternoon light faded and the barn grew darker, Riley Foster sat in the driver's seat of an 80-year-old Jeep, reading a dead man's confession, and slowly realized that she'd inherited far more than a restoration project. She'd inherited a secret that could rewrite history. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., there were people who had spent 8 decades making sure the secret stayed buried. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. If you're enjoying it so far, hit that subscribe button. It means everything to us. Riley sat in the driver's seat of the 1943 Willys Jeep as darkness settled over Harold's barn, the beam of her flashlight illuminating page after page of Corporal Thomas J. Brennan's handwriting. The journal was remarkably well preserved, protected by the leather satchel and the dry conditions inside the sealed barn. The entries began conventionally enough: a young soldier's observations about training at Camp Edwards in Massachusetts, the anxiety of shipping out to England, the endless waiting before D-Day. Thomas wrote with the kind of raw honesty that suggested he never expected anyone else to read these words. May 15, 1944, England. Captain Morrison says we ship out soon. Nobody knows exactly when, but you can feel it coming. The guys are trying to act tough, making jokes, talking about French girls and German beer. But at night, in the barracks, you can hear guys crying, praying, writing letters they hope their families never have to read. I wrote one to Harold yesterday. Told him if anything happens to me, he should take over the ranch, marry that pretty girl he's been too scared to talk to, live the life I might not get to live. Sealed it up and gave it to the chaplain. God, I hope he never has to mail it. Riley felt a lump in her throat. Thomas had survived the war, but only in the technical sense. According to her father's stories, Thomas had never been the same after he came home. He'd been withdrawn, haunted, prone to violent nightmares. He'd worked as a ranch hand, never married, never talked about the war, and at age 34, he'd walked into the barn on his brother's property and shot himself. She turned the pages carefully, watching as Thomas's entries became shorter, more terse, as D-Day approached. Then came June 6, 1944. June 6, 1944, 2,300 hours. I don't know how to write about today. Don't know if I can. We hit Omaha Beach at 0630. First wave. Company A, 116th Infantry. They told us the bombers would have destroyed the German positions. They told us it would be easy. They were wrong about everything. The ramp dropped and men started dying immediately. Machine gun fire like nothing I've ever imagined. Artillery shells. Mortars. The water turned red. Guys were screaming, drowning, torn apart. I saw Sergeant Kowalski get cut in half by machine gun fire before he even got off the landing craft. Saw Private Henderson take shrapnel to the face, just gone. I don't remember making it to the beach. 1 minute I was in the water, trying not to drown with 80 pounds of gear pulling me down, and the next I was behind a steel obstacle, bullets hitting the metal above my head, bodies floating in the surf. Out of 240 men in our company, maybe 40 made it off the beach that first hour. Riley had to pause, wiping her eyes. She'd seen Saving Private Ryan, had read history books about D-Day, but there was something different about reading the words of someone who'd actually been there. Someone who'd survived when so many others hadn't. The entries for the next few days were sporadic, brief notes about pushing inland, about the chaos of combat, about friends dying. Then came the entry that changed everything. June 9, 1944. Something happened today that I don't understand. That I'm not supposed to understand. That I'm not supposed to talk about, ever. Our platoon got separated during a firefight near a village called St. Mary-Glise. Lieutenant Carson was killed by a sniper. We were down to 12 men, cut off from the main advance, taking fire from a German position in an old stone church. Corporal Jenkins, he's from Wisconsin, good guy, always sharing his cigarettes. Jenkins spotted what looked like a bunker entrance behind the church. We cleared the church, found 3 dead Germans and 1 wounded one who died before we could get any information from him. Then we found the entrance to what we thought was just a standard defensive bunker. It wasn't. The entrance went down maybe 30 feet underground, carved into bedrock. The Germans had built something down there, a facility, not just a bunker. Concrete walls, electric lighting still working somehow, rooms full of equipment and documents. And at the very back, behind a steel door that took us 20 minutes to break open with grenades and rifle fire, we found them. Riley leaned closer to the journal, her heart pounding. Found what? 12 prisoners. American soldiers. Our guys. But they weren't supposed to be there. That's what Captain Harrison said when we finally got word to battalion and he came down to see for himself. He kept saying this is impossible. This is completely impossible. The prisoners were from different units, 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, even some guys from the 1st Infantry Division. They'd been captured at different times, different places. Some during the initial paratroop drops on June 5, some during the beach landings on June 6. But here's the thing that makes no sense. According to our records, every single one of those 12 men was listed as killed in action. Not missing. Not captured. Dead. Confirmed dead. Several of them had already had death notifications sent to their families. The Germans had kept them alive. Had been interrogating them, but not just normal interrogation. There was medical equipment down there, surgical tools, drugs we didn't recognize. One of the prisoners, Private Danny Kerrigan from the 101st, told us they'd been drugged, questioned while unconscious, subjected to some kind of experimental techniques the Germans were testing. Captain Harrison immediately classified everything. Said this was above our pay grade, that intelligence would handle it. He ordered us not to talk about what we found, not to mention it in letters home, not even to discuss it among ourselves. The official story was that we liberated a standard POW holding area and recovered 12 prisoners who had been incorrectly listed as Kia due to the chaos of the invasion. But before we left that bunker, before the intelligence officers arrived and took over, I saw something. Documents in German that I couldn't read, but with our unit designations on them. Photographs of American soldiers, some I recognized, some I didn't. Charts and graphs tracking something. And in one of the back rooms, I found a metal case hidden under a loose floor tile. I don't know what made me look there, just instinct maybe. Inside were documents, photographs, lists of names. All in English. All classified top secret. I took the case. Hid it in my gear. I know I shouldn't have, no it's probably court-martial if anyone finds out, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. Felt like a cover-up starting before we even understood what we were covering up. Captain Harrison distributed the 12 rescued prisoners among different units, split them up so they wouldn't talk to each other. I heard later that they were all sent back to England within 48 hours, debriefed by intelligence, and then scattered to different units in different theaters. Making sure none of them could compare stories. I don't know what we found in that bunker. Don't know what the Germans were doing with those prisoners. But I know it scared Captain Harrison worse than German artillery, and I know that powerful people want it forgotten. I'm keeping the case. Keeping it hidden. If something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth about what happened under that church in France. Riley sat back, her mind reeling. She quickly flipped through the remaining pages of the journal. The entries continued through the rest of June and into July, documenting the continued push through France, but Thomas never mentioned the bunker discovery again. The final entry was dated August 15, 1944. Headed home. Wounded in the leg, nothing serious, but enough to get me a ticket back to the States. Should be grateful. So many guys didn't make it. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm bringing something dark home with me. The case is hidden in my Jeep, they're letting us ship personal vehicles home. Probably figured it's easier than dealing with surplus disposal. Nobody knows it's there. Nobody's looked. Harold, if you're reading this, if something happened to me and you found this journal, I'm sorry for the burden I'm about to put on you. The case is welded into the frame of my Jeep, driver's side, between the frame rails. Inside is evidence of something bad. Something that goes higher up the chain than I can even imagine. I don't know what to do with it. Don't know who to trust. But it needs to be preserved. Someday, someone might be able to do something about it. Someone braver than me. The journal ended there. Riley closed the leather cover carefully, her hands shaking. She looked at the small metal case she'd found in the satchel, about the size of a cigar box, unmarked, with a simple clasp. This wasn't the case Thomas had described. This was something else, something he'd kept separately. She opened it. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them, military photographs from World War II. The first few showed American soldiers in various poses, casual shots, probably taken during downtime. But Riley recognized none of them from history books or war documentaries. These weren't famous generals or Medal of Honor recipients. These were ordinary soldiers. Underneath each photograph was a typed label with a name, rank, unit, and date. And next to each date was a notation, Kia, confirmed. Riley's blood ran cold as she understood what she was looking at. These were the dead men who weren't dead. The 12 prisoners from the bunker, along with dozens of others. Each photograph showed a soldier, and each one was marked as killed in action, but according to Thomas's account, at least some of them had been very much alive when found in that German bunker. She kept looking through the photographs, her horror growing with each one. There had to be at least 40 soldiers here, all listed as Kia between June 5 and June 8, 1944. All from different units. All supposedly dead. But the most disturbing items were at the bottom of the case. Official U.S. Army documents, typed on military letterhead, classified top secret, eyes only. The first was dated June 12, 1944, and was signed by someone with the rank of colonel, though the signature was illegible. Riley read it slowly, struggling to understand the military jargon and bureaucratic language. Operation Silent Recovery, Classification Level, Maximum. Following the discovery of German experimental interrogation facility near St. Mary-Église, recovered personnel, N=12, have been secured and debriefed under controlled conditions. Initial assessment indicates German intelligence had developed advanced chemical interrogation techniques, potentially aided by intelligence compromise at higher levels of SHAEF command structure. Critical concern, all recovered personnel had been officially documented as Kia prior to recovery. Death notifications had been dispatched to NOK, next of kin, in 11 of 12 cases. Reversal of Kia status would require explanation of circumstances that cannot be disclosed for reasons of operational security and potential compromise of ongoing intelligence operations. Recommendation: maintain Kia status for all 12 recovered personnel. Transfer individuals to Pacific Theater under assumed identities with new service records. This action prevents security breach while preserving operational capabilities of affected personnel. Alternative would require disclosure of German intelligence penetration and experimental interrogation methods, potentially compromising Allied security. Authorization, requested under emergency war powers, presidential approval level. Implementation, immediate. Riley had to read it 3 times before the full meaning sank in. The U.S. Army had found 12 American soldiers who had been officially declared dead. Rather than correct the records and return these men to their families, they'd given them new identities and sent them to fight in the Pacific Theater. 12 families had received death notifications, had held funerals, had grieved, while their sons, husbands, and brothers were still alive, reassigned under false names to different units on the other side of the world. Jesus Christ, Riley whispered. But there was more. A second document, dated July 1944. Operation Silent Recovery, Status Update. Of 12 recovered personnel reassigned to Pacific Theater operations, 4 have subsequently been confirmed Kia in combat, actual. 6 remain in active service under assumed identities. 2 have been discharged due to combat-related injuries and have been relocated to domestic facilities where their original identities will not be disclosed. Ongoing concern: Private Daniel Kerrigan, service name, James Morrison, has made repeated requests to contact his family in Boston. Subject has been informed that such contact would constitute treason and would result in court-martial and potential execution. Subject remains non-compliant and represents security risk. Recommendation: transfer Subject Kerrigan to isolated duty station with limited personnel contact. Maintain surveillance. A third document, dated December 1944. Operation Silent Recovery, terminal action required. Private Daniel Kerrigan, assumed identity, James Morrison, has been declared AWOL from duty station at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. Subject was last seen near communications facility, potentially attempting to send unauthorized communication to family members. Extensive search has failed to locate subject. Given the extreme security implications of this case, and the subject's detailed knowledge of German interrogation facility and subsequent identity reassignment program, this office recommends terminal action upon location. Authorization, approved. Execute upon contact. Riley felt sick. They'd killed him. They'd found Private Kerrigan and they'd killed him to protect their secret. A man who'd survived D-Day, survived German captivity, survived being declared dead by his own army, murdered by his own people because he wanted to tell his family he was alive. The remaining documents in the case detailed similar outcomes for others among the 12. Some died in combat under their false identities. Some disappeared under mysterious circumstances. By the end of the war, according to the final document dated April 1946, all 12 of the recovered prisoners were confirmed dead, either actually killed in subsequent combat, or lost in various circumstances related to operational security. 12 men saved from a German bunker. 12 men who should have gone home to their families. All dead within 2 years, most of them killed or allowed to die specifically because they knew too much. And at the bottom of the case, Riley found a list. A typed list of names, not just the 12 from the bunker, but 47 names total. American soldiers, all listed as Kia between June 5 to 8, 1944, all from different units. Next to each name was a notation, potential silent recovery subject, status unknown. 47 soldiers who might have been alive when declared dead. 47 families who might have grieved unnecessarily. And someone in the U.S. Army had known about it, had documented it, and had buried it. Thomas Brennan had stolen these documents, had hidden them in his Jeep, and had brought them home. And then he'd spent 14 years trying to figure out what to do with them before the weight of it all had driven him to suicide. Riley's phone buzzed, startling her badly. It was nearly 9 p.m., she'd been in the barn for over 12 hours. The text was from Harold. Riley, are you all right? Saw your truck still at the barn. Don't work too hard. This can wait until tomorrow. She texted back quickly, found something important. Need to talk to you. Can I come by the house? The response came within seconds, doors unlocked. I'll put coffee on. Riley carefully placed the journal and the metal case back in the leather satchel. She took dozens more photographs of the Jeep, documenting the welded box in the frame from every angle. Then she locked the barn doors behind her and drove the short distance to Harold's house. Harold's story. Harold Brennan's living room was exactly what you'd expect from an 89-year-old veteran who lived alone, comfortable but worn furniture, walls covered with photographs spanning 7 decades, a massive television that was probably 15 years old, and the lingering smell of old coffee and older memories. Harold sat in his recliner, 2 mugs of fresh coffee on the table beside him. He gestured for Riley to sit on the couch, his blue eyes sharp despite the late hour. You found it, he said. Not a question, a statement. You knew what was in there, Riley replied, setting the satchel on the coffee table between them. Harold nodded slowly. Not the details. Thomas never told me the details. But I knew he'd brought something back from the war, something that ate at him every single day until he couldn't take it anymore. Did you ever read the journal? No. Harold's voice was firm. Thomas asked me to keep it hidden, and I did. He said someday someone might need to know the truth, but that I should never look. Said it would only burden me the way it burdened him. So I locked that barn 65 years ago and I haven't opened it since. Not until today when I gave you the keys. Riley pulled out the journal and the metal case, placing them on the table. Harold, this is huge. This is a massive cover-up. American soldiers declared dead when they were alive, then killed to keep them quiet. Families who grieve for men who are still alive. And it involves high-level military command, maybe even presidential authorization. Harold closed his eyes. Marcus always said you had a moral compass that pointed true north, same as your father. That's why I gave you those keys, Riley. Because I knew if there was something important in that barn, you'd do the right thing with it. What is the right thing? Riley asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. This is 80 years old. Everyone involved is probably dead. But these families, some of them probably still have living relatives who never knew the truth. I know one of them, Harold said quietly. Riley looked up sharply. What? Harold stood slowly and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a photo album. He flipped through pages of black and white photographs before finding what he was looking for. He handed the album to Riley, pointing to a specific picture. It showed two young men in army uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was clearly a young Thomas Brennan. The other Riley didn't recognize. That's Danny Kerrigan, Harold said. Thomas's best friend. They trained together, shipped out together, landed on Omaha Beach together. Danny was one of the 12 that Thomas found in that bunker. Riley looked at the documents again, finding Private Daniel Kerrigan's name. The man who'd been given the false identity of James Morrison. The man who'd gone AWOL trying to contact his family. The man who'd been killed for it. Thomas blamed himself, Harold continued, his voice thick with emotion. He thought if he'd gone to higher command, if he'd made more noise about what they were doing to those men, maybe Danny would still be alive. But Thomas was just a corporal. He was 22 years old. What could he have done against generals and colonels and whatever politicians were behind the whole thing? So he kept the evidence, Riley said. He kept it, and it destroyed him. He'd get drunk and cry about Danny. About the others. About families who thought their boys were dead when they were alive, and then those boys actually died because the army needed to keep them quiet. Harold wiped his eyes roughly. Thomas put a gun in his mouth in 1959 because he couldn't live with the secret and couldn't figure out how to tell it. And you've carried it since then, Riley said softly. I've carried the knowledge that something terrible happened, yes. But I've been a coward, Riley. I've spent 65 years keeping my brother's secret because I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean, afraid of who it might hurt, afraid of stirring up things better left buried. He looked at her directly. But I'm 89 years old. I'm dying. And before I go, I want to know that Thomas's sacrifice meant something. That those 12 men didn't die for nothing. Riley felt the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders like a physical thing. She looked at the journal, at the documents, at the photographs of men who'd been erased from history. The box welded into the Jeep frame, she said. Thomas mentioned it in his journal. There's more evidence inside, isn't there? Harold nodded. I assume so. Thomas said he'd welded the most important documents into the Jeep itself. Said if anyone ever came looking for what he'd taken, they'd find the obvious hiding places but never think to check the vehicle's frame. I'll need to cut it open, Riley said. It's going to damage the Jeep's frame, reduce its restoration value. The Jeep doesn't matter, Harold said firmly. The truth matters. Whatever's in that frame, it needs to come out. And then you need to decide what to do with it. Why me? Riley asked. Why not go to the media yourself? Why not contact historians or the army or? Because I'm an old man who could be dismissed as senile, Harold interrupted. Because I'm too close to this, I'm Thomas's brother, I'm emotionally invested, I have an agenda. But you? He smiled slightly. You're a 28-year-old diesel mechanic who happened to find something while cleaning out a barn. You have no connection to any of this except circumstance. You're credible in a way I never could be. Riley was quiet for a long moment, turning one of the photographs over in her hands. It showed a young man, maybe 20 years old, in paratrooper gear. The caption read, Private Joseph Martinez, 101st Airborne, Kia June 6, 1944, Normandy. But according to the documents, Joseph Martinez had been found alive in that bunker, given the false identity Robert Johnson, and had died 2 months later in the Philippines under circumstances described as operational security related. Joseph Martinez probably had family somewhere. Maybe children who'd grown up without a father, grandchildren who'd never met him, all because someone had decided it was easier to keep him dead than to admit the army had made a mistake, or worse, had been compromised by German intelligence. "I need to open that box," Riley said finally. "I need to see what else Thomas found. And then I need to figure out who to trust with this information." "Be careful," Harold warned. "Thomas always said that powerful people buried this secret for a reason. Just because it's 80 years old doesn't mean those institutions don't still have an interest in keeping it buried." Riley packed up the journal and documents carefully, placing them back in the satchel. "I'll be careful. But Harold, if this is real, if this is all true, then it needs to come out. Those families deserve to know what happened to their loved ones." As she drove home that night, Riley's mind was racing. She had a barn full of junk to clear out, a business on the verge of bankruptcy, and now she was sitting on what might be one of the biggest military cover-ups in American history. The rational thing would be to focus on the Jeep's restoration value, ignore the documents, and solve her financial problems. But Riley had been raised by Marcus Foster, and Marcus Foster had taught her that some things mattered more than money. Integrity. Truth. Justice. The kind of values that Thomas Brennan had died for. The workshop investigation. Sunday morning, Riley was back at the barn before sunrise. She'd barely slept, her mind too full of soldiers' faces and classified documents and the weight of 80-year-old secrets. She'd made a decision during the sleepless night: she would document everything thoroughly before opening the welded box. Photographs, measurements, detailed notes about the condition and location of everything. If this was going to come out, and she was increasingly certain it had to, then she needed ironclad evidence that couldn't be dismissed or denied. Riley spent the morning carefully clearing the area around the Jeep, creating workspace. She set up her portable work lights, grabbed her camera, and began photographing every detail of the vehicle. The Willys MB was in rougher condition than it had first appeared. The floor panels were rusted through in several places, the seats were rotted and collapsed, and the engine was essentially a solid block of corroded metal. As a restoration project for sale, it would require tens of thousands of dollars in parts and labor. But Riley wasn't interested in restoration anymore. She was interested in the truth welded into its frame. She rolled her professional floor jack under the vehicle and raised it high enough to work comfortably underneath. With her trouble light positioned to illuminate the underside of the frame, Riley examined the welds more carefully. The box was approximately 12 inches wide, 18 inches long, and maybe 6 inches deep. It had been crafted from quarter-inch steel plate and welded directly into the channel of the frame rail in a way that actually strengthened the structure. You'd never know it wasn't original unless you looked closely at the weld beads. Thomas had done professional work. These weren't amateur welds done in a barn. These were military-quality welds, probably done in a proper shop with proper equipment, likely sometime in late 1944 or early 1945 when Thomas was back in the States. Riley took dozens of photographs, documenting the box from every angle. Then she began the process of cutting it out. She brought her plasma cutter, a tool she used for cutting through rusted bolts and damaged metal in her diesel repair work. It made quick work of steel, and within 20 minutes she'd cut around 3 sides of the box, leaving one edge attached as a hinge. With a pry bar, Riley carefully lifted the cut section. The box opened, and she found herself staring at a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, preservation techniques that had kept the contents protected for 80 years. Her hands shook as she carefully lifted the bundle out of the frame. It was heavier than expected, perhaps 5 or 6 pounds. She set it on a clean tarp she'd spread on the ground and began unwrapping the layers of oilcloth. Inside was another metal case, this one larger than the one she'd found in the satchel, about the size of a shoebox. It was painted olive drab and had German text stenciled on the lid, "Streng geheim, top secret." This was a German intelligence case. Thomas had taken it from that bunker. Riley opened it carefully. Inside were documents, lots of them, in both German and English. Photographs, maps, and what looked like medical records. The English documents appeared to be carbon copies of official U.S. Army communications. Riley's German was non-existent, but she recognized enough cognates to understand that the German documents were intelligence reports. She pulled out her phone and began photographing every page, every photograph, every document. She'd need expert help to translate the German and to understand the full implications of what she was looking at, but even with her limited understanding, certain things were clear. The Germans had known about Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion, with remarkable specificity. They'd known which beaches would be hit, which units would land where, and even had photographs of some of the commanders who would lead the assault. That level of intelligence suggested a major security breach, possibly someone high in Allied command feeding information to the Germans. The medical records were even more disturbing. They documented experiments on American prisoners, not torture in the conventional sense, but systematic testing of what appeared to be chemical interrogation techniques. Truth serums, drugs that alter memory, substances that induced compliance. One document in English, an intercepted Allied communication, made Riley's blood run cold. From Office of Strategic Services, London to SHAF Intelligence, Security Division. Date, June 3, 1944. Classification, Most Secret. Be advised that German intelligence has obtained details regarding Operation Overlord through unknown compromise. Recommend immediate investigation of security protocols and personnel with access to operational planning. The breach appears to be at highest levels of command structure. OSS has identified at least 12 Allied personnel who may have been compromised through chemical interrogation following capture during preliminary operations. Recommend these individuals be listed as key to prevent potential intelligence compromise through repatriation and debriefing by enemy operatives. Riley read it 3 times, the implications slowly sinking in. It wasn't just a cover-up after the fact. Someone in Allied intelligence had recommended declaring captured soldiers dead specifically to prevent them from being recovered and possibly used as intelligence assets by the Germans. They'd written these men off as acceptable losses to protect operational security. But Thomas's journal said those men had been recovered alive. Which meant the recommendation had been implemented. They were listed as Kia, but then when they were found alive anyway, someone had to figure out what to do with them. The answer: give them new identities and send them far away, where they couldn't compromise the investigation into the intelligence breach. And if any of them tried to contact their families, tried to reveal they were still alive, eliminate them as security threats. Riley sat back on her heels, her mind reeling. This wasn't just about 12 soldiers. This was about a massive intelligence failure at the highest levels of Allied command. Someone had been leaking information to the Germans, and rather than acknowledge the breach and find the leak, they'd sacrificed American soldiers to cover it up. She kept photographing, documenting everything. There were lists of names, hundreds of names, of soldiers who'd been captured or gone missing during the early days of the Normandy invasion. Some were marked recovered, some confirmed Kia, and some simply had question marks. And there, near the bottom of one list, Riley found a name that made her freeze: Corporal Thomas J. Brennan, 116th Infantry Regiment. Status: compromised. Recommended action: monitor. They'd known about Thomas. Known he'd taken the documents. And they'd been watching him. Dramatic pause. Before we continue, if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow's story is going to be even more intense. Music swell. Riley's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Harold's name appeared on the screen. "Riley, you need to come to the house right now." Harold's voice was tight with fear. "There are 2 men here asking about Thomas's belongings. They say they're from the Department of Defense, working on historical records for veterans. They know about the Jeep. They know you've been in the barn." Riley's heart raced. "Harold, don't tell them anything. I'm on my way." "Riley, they're not asking." One of them just showed me a document that says Thomas's military property is technically still government-owned and subject to recovery for historical purposes. They're claiming legal authority to seize anything from his service. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Don't let them into the barn. Riley quickly gathered all the documents back into the German case, wrapped it in the oilcloth, and looked around frantically for a hiding place. She couldn't take it with her. If these men searched her truck, they'd find it immediately. Her eyes fell on the pile of hay bales she'd broken apart earlier. She quickly buried the wrapped case deep in the loose hay, then grabbed several pieces of broken farm equipment and piled them on top. It wouldn't survive a thorough search, but it might be enough for now. Then she grabbed the Jeep's leather satchel with the journal and the smaller case, the items Thomas had kept separate, and stuffed them under the seat of her truck. As she drove toward Harold's house, Riley's mind raced. How did they know? Who had told them? And after 80 years of silence, why were they suddenly interested now? She was about to find out just how dangerous 80-year-old secrets could be. Riley pulled into Harold's driveway to find a black sedan with government plates parked near the house. Through the living room window, she could see Harold sitting in his recliner, 2 men in dark suits standing over him. The body language was all wrong. This wasn't a friendly visit from government historians. Riley grabbed the leather satchel from under her truck seat, weighing her options. She could drive away, hide the evidence somewhere safe. But Harold was in there alone with these men, and he was 89 years old. She wasn't leaving him. She tucked the satchel under a tarp in her truck bed, covering it with tools, then walked to the front door. Before she could knock, it opened. One of the men stood there, mid-40s, military haircut going gray, eyes that assessed her in about 2 seconds and catalogued her as a potential problem. "Miss Foster," he said. Not a question. He already knew who she was. "I'm Robert Keller, Department of Defense, Historical Records Division. This is my colleague, David Torres. We need to speak with you about military property that may be in your possession." "I'm cleaning out a barn for Mr. Brennan," Riley said carefully. "I haven't found any military property. Just an old Jeep and farm equipment." "The Jeep is military property," Torres interjected. He was younger, maybe 35, with the kind of aggressive energy that suggested he'd been military himself recently. Corporal Thomas Brennan was issued that vehicle in 1944. It was never properly decommissioned or transferred to civilian ownership. Technically, it still belongs to the U.S. Army. Riley stepped into the house, positioning herself near Harold. "That's interesting, considering it's been sitting in a private barn for 80 years and the Army never seemed to care before." "We care now," Keller said flatly. "We're conducting a comprehensive review of World War II veterans' records, ensuring proper documentation of military equipment. We need to inspect the vehicle and any materials that may have been stored with it." Harold spoke up, his voice steady despite his age. "The Jeep belonged to my brother. He brought it home after the war, same as thousands of other veterans did. It's been private property for 8 decades. With respect, Mr. Brennan, your brother may have been under the impression it was his property, but military vehicles require official transfer documentation. Without that, it remains government property." Keller's tone was polite but firm. "We're not here to cause problems. We simply need to inspect the vehicle and secure any sensitive materials that may be with it." "What kind of sensitive materials?" Riley asked. Torres and Keller exchanged a glance. Torres answered, "Records indicate that Corporal Brennan may have retained classified documents from his service. Such documents, even decades old, remain classified unless officially declassified through proper channels." "How do you even know about this Jeep?" Riley pressed. "Harold hasn't told anyone about it. I just found it yesterday." "So how did you show up less than 24 hours later?" Another glance between the 2 men. Keller pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then turned it to show Riley. It was her Instagram account, a photo she'd posted 3 months ago of herself working on a diesel engine, with the caption "Another day at Foster and Daughter Diesel Repair, Mercer's Hollow, MT. Social media makes things easy," Keller said. We've been monitoring for mentions of Thomas Brennan's name in connection with World War II materials. Your name came up in property records as someone who'd signed documents related to Harold Brennan's barn. We ran your social media, found your location, and drove up from Salt Lake City this morning. It was a reasonable explanation. Almost too reasonable. Let me see your credentials, Riley said. Both men produced identification, official-looking badges with Department of Defense seals, identifying them as civil servants in the Historical Records Division. The IDs looked legitimate, but Riley had no way to verify them. The barn is locked, she said. And I don't have authorization to let anyone in without Mr. Brennan's permission. I don't give permission, Harold said firmly. Not until I speak with my attorney. Torres's jaw tightened. Sir, this is a matter of national security. Then you'll have no problem coming back with a warrant, Harold interrupted. I'm an old man, but I'm not stupid. You show me a court order, and I'll let you in. Until then, get off my property. Keller's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Mr. Brennan, I strongly advise you not to obstruct a federal investigation. The materials your brother took from a classified military operation are still classified. Possessing them is a federal crime, as is destroying or concealing them. I don't know what you're talking about, Harold said. And even if I did, I'd want my attorney present before discussing it. Now get out. The two men stood their ground for a moment, then Keller nodded slowly. We'll be back with appropriate legal authority. In the meantime, I need to inform you that tampering with or removing materials from that barn could be considered destruction of government property and obstruction of justice. Those are serious federal charges. After they left, Riley and Harold sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Harold spoke. They're not historians, he said quietly. Those are intelligence people. Probably military intelligence, maybe CIA. Someone knows what Thomas took, and they want it back. How did they find out so fast? Riley wondered aloud. I only found the Jeep yesterday afternoon. Harold thought for a moment. When's the last time you had your phone on you in the barn? Riley's stomach dropped. The whole time. I was taking photographs, using the flashlight. Then they've been listening. Or tracking. Or both. Harold stood slowly. Riley, this is bigger and more dangerous than I thought. These aren't people who are going to just go away. They're going to come back with legal authority, or they're going to come back without it. Either way, you need to get those documents out of that barn right now. I already hid them, Riley said. But they're not safe there long term. Harold, I need to know, is there anyone we can trust with this? Anyone who won't just bury it again? Harold was quiet for a long moment. There might be someone. Your father had a friend, journalist named Sarah Chen. She worked for the Associated Press, covered military affairs. Marcus once told me that if anything ever happened to him, if there was ever something important that needed to see the light of day, Sarah Chen was the one person he'd trust to do it right. Is she still alive? As far as I know. She'd be in her 60s now, probably retired. But Marcus trusted her, and that's good enough for me. Riley pulled out her phone, then hesitated. If they're monitoring my phone. Use mine, Harold said, handing her an ancient flip phone. I'm 89 years old. I'm not on social media, I don't have apps, and this thing barely makes phone calls. It's the closest thing to surveillance proof you'll find. Riley took the phone and began searching for Sarah Chen. It took 20 minutes of searching and several wrong numbers, but she finally reached someone who knew where Sarah Chen was living, Portland, Oregon, retired but still doing freelance investigative work. The phone rang 4 times before a woman answered. Hello? Is this Sarah Chen? The journalist who covered military affairs for AP. Who's asking? My name is Riley Foster. My father was Marcus Foster. He was. Marcus Foster from Montana, Sarah interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp with attention. I remember Marcus. Good man. We worked together on a story about Army equipment maintenance fraud back in 2003. How is he? He passed away 3 years ago. Heart attack. I'm sorry to hear that. Sarah's voice softened. What can I do for you, Riley? I found something. Something related to World War II, to classified operations and soldiers who were declared dead when they were alive. My father's friend said you were someone who could be trusted with important information. There was a long pause. That's a very specific kind of story. What exactly have you found? Riley took a deep breath and gave Sarah a condensed version: the Jeep, the journal, the documents about Operation Silent Recovery, the men from the Department of Defense showing up within hours of her discovery. When she finished, Sarah was quiet for so long that Riley thought the call had dropped. Are you still there? I'm here. I'm just processing. Riley, do you understand what you're sitting on? If this is real, if you have documented evidence of a government program that faked soldiers' deaths and then killed them to cover up an intelligence breach, this is Pulitzer Prize-level journalism. This is the kind of story that brings down careers and rewrites history books. I know. That's why I need help. These men who showed up today, they're going to come back. And I don't think they're coming back to politely ask for the documents. You need to get out of Montana, Sarah said immediately. Today. Right now. Get those documents, get in your car, and drive to Portland. I have contacts with the National Archives, with military historians, with other journalists who've covered similar stories. We can verify the documents, authenticate them, and if they're real, we go public in a way that can't be buried or suppressed. What about Harold? They know he's involved. Can he travel? Riley looked at Harold, who'd been listening to her side of the conversation. He nodded. Tell her I'm old, not dead. I can travel. He says yes, Riley relayed. Then both of you, right now. Don't pack, don't tell anyone where you're going, just get in your vehicle and drive west. I'll text you an address where you can meet me. She paused. Wait, you said they might be monitoring your phone. Okay, different plan. There's a town called Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, about 4 hours west of where you are. There's a diner there called Mabel's, right off I-90. Meet me there tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I'll drive up from Portland tonight. Tomorrow morning? I know it's fast, but Riley, listen to me. I've covered military intelligence operations for 30 years. The people you're dealing with don't follow normal rules. They're not going to get a warrant. They're going to make the problem disappear, and that includes anyone who knows about it. You need to move now. Riley's hand was shaking. Okay. Okay, we'll be there. One more thing, Sarah said. Before you leave, photograph everything. Every document, every photograph, every page of that journal. Upload the photos to a secure cloud service, one that's not connected to your regular accounts. If anything happens to the physical documents, we need backups that can't be erased. After the call ended, Riley looked at Harold. We need to leave. Today. I'll pack a bag, Harold said, standing with surprising energy for a man his age. You get those documents from the barn. Meet back here in 20 minutes. The race against time. Riley drove back to the barn, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She kept checking her rearview mirror, expecting to see the black sedan following her, but the road behind remained empty. At the barn, she worked quickly, excavating the German case from its hiding spot in the hay. She spread the documents on a clean tarp and began photographing every single page, using her camera's macro setting to capture the fine print and handwritten notes. It took 45 minutes to photograph everything. Then she carefully repackaged the documents, placing them back in the German case and wrapping it securely. As she was loading the case into her truck, she heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Not from the direction of Harold's house, but from the back road that ran along the far edge of the property. Riley's stomach clenched. She quickly covered the case with a tarp and walked to the barn door. 2 vehicles, not the black sedan, but a white panel van and a pickup truck, were parking near the tree line about 200 yards away. Men got out of both vehicles. 4 of them, all wearing civilian clothes, but moving with military precision. One of them had binoculars and was scanning the barn. This wasn't the Department of Defense. This was something else. Riley didn't wait to find out what. She jumped in her truck, started the engine, and floored it toward Harold's house. In her rearview mirror, she saw the men start running toward their vehicles. She reached Harold's house, horn blaring. Harold came out with a small overnight bag, moving faster than she'd seen him move in years. "Get in!" Riley shouted. Harold threw his bag in the back seat and climbed into the passenger side. "What's wrong?" "More men. At the barn." "They weren't DOD." Riley peeled out of the driveway, her diesel engine roaring as she pushed the old Ford to its limits. Behind them, the white van and pickup truck appeared, accelerating to follow. "They're following us," Harold said, surprisingly calm. "I noticed." Riley's mind raced. The direct route to I-90 in Idaho would take them through town, past her shop, along roads where they could easily be cut off or forced to stop. She needed a different route. "Hold on," she said, and took a hard right onto a logging road. The road was barely more than a dirt track, winding up into the mountains. Riley's truck, built for rough terrain and well-maintained, handled it easily. The vehicles behind them, sedan and van built for highways, struggled with the rough surface. "Where are we going?" Harold asked, bracing himself as they bounced over ruts. "There's an old fire service road that connects to Highway 200. It's rough, but if we can reach it, we'll come out 30 miles west of town. They'll expect us to go through Mercer's Hollow." The chase continued for 20 harrowing minutes, Riley's truck climbing higher into the mountains, the pursuing vehicles falling farther behind as the road deteriorated. Finally, Riley saw the marker she'd been looking for, a faded Forest Service sign indicating the fire road intersection. She took the turn, and within minutes they were descending the western slope of the mountains. Behind them, the pursuing vehicles were no longer visible. An hour later, they reached Highway 200 and turned west toward Idaho. Riley finally allowed herself to breathe. "You drive like your father," Harold said with a slight smile. "He once outran a state trooper in a snowstorm because he was late for your mother's birthday dinner." Despite everything, Riley laughed. "I never heard that story." "There are lots of stories you never heard. Maybe it's time someone told them." They drove in silence for a while, putting miles between themselves and Montana. Riley kept checking her mirrors, but the highway behind remained clear. "Harold," she said finally, "what do you think Thomas would want us to do with this information?" Harold was quiet for a long moment. Thomas spent 14 years trying to figure out what to do. In the end, the weight of it killed him. He wanted the truth to come out, but he was too afraid of the consequences. Too afraid of what it would mean for the families, for the military, for everyone involved. "And what do you think?" "I think," Harold said slowly, "that truth is always better than lies, even when truth hurts. Those families deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. The public deserves to know what their government did. And Thomas deserves to be vindicated, to be remembered as a man who tried to do the right thing, not as a broken veteran who couldn't handle the war." Riley nodded. "Then we're doing the right thing." They reached Coeur d'Alene just after midnight. Riley found a small motel on the edge of town, paid cash for a room, and helped Harold inside. The old man was exhausted but refusing to show it. "You should sleep," Riley said. "We meet Saracen in 8 hours." "I don't think I can sleep," Harold admitted. "My brother's been dead for 65 years, and I'm finally about to help him keep the promise he couldn't keep himself." Riley sat with Harold, and they talked about Thomas, about her father, about wars and secrets and the price of truth. Somewhere around 2 a.m., Harold finally dozed off in his chair. Riley stayed awake, watching the parking lot through a crack in the curtains, making sure they hadn't been followed. She uploaded the photographs she'd taken to 3 different cloud services, using the motel's public Wi-Fi. If anything happened to the physical documents, the evidence would survive. Meeting Saracen. Mabel's Diner was the kind of place that existed in every small American town: vinyl booths, checkerboard floor, a menu heavy on breakfast food, and coffee strong enough to restart your heart. Riley and Harold arrived at 7:45 a.m., tired and nervous. Sarah Chen walked in at exactly 8 a.m. She was in her early 60s, Chinese-American, with short gray hair and the kind of intense, focused energy that suggested she'd spent her career chasing stories that mattered. She spotted Riley and Harold immediately and walked over to their booth. "Marcus Foster's daughter?" she asked. "Riley. This is Harold Brennan." Sarah slid into the booth opposite them, ordering coffee from a passing waitress before turning her full attention to Riley. "Show me what you've got." Riley pulled out her phone and opened the cloud storage app. She handed it to Sarah, who began scrolling through the photographs. Her expression changed as she saw the journal entries, the classified documents, the photographs of soldiers marked Kia. "My God," she whispered. "This is real. This is actually real." "You doubted it?" Riley asked. "In this business, you learn to doubt everything until you see the evidence." Sarah kept scrolling, her fingers moving faster. "Do you have the physical documents?" "In my truck." "Are you certain you weren't followed?" "Pretty certain. We took back roads, changed routes 3 times, paid cash for everything. My phone has been off except to access the cloud storage." Sarah looked up, her expression grave. "Riley, Harold, I need you to understand something. This story is going to blow up in ways you can't imagine. Military cover-ups, soldiers declared dead when they were alive, possible intelligence leaks at the highest levels of World War II command. This impacts everyone from the Department of Defense to the CIA to veterans organizations to the families of every soldier who died in that war." "We understand," Harold said firmly. "I don't think you do," Sarah pressed. "People are going to call you liars. They're going to say the documents are forgeries. They're going to dig into your lives, find every mistake you've ever made, and use it to discredit you. They're going to make your life hell." "They already are," Riley pointed out. "We had men chasing us yesterday who weren't interested in polite conversation." Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay. Here's what we're going to do. I have a contact at the National Archives who specializes in World War II documents. He can authenticate these, verify the paper, the typewriter fonts, the signatures. I also have a colleague who's a forensic document examiner. We'll need both to confirm these aren't modern forgeries." "How long will that take?" Harold asked. "If we push, maybe a week. But we can't go public until we have authentication. If we publish and these turn out to be fake, we lose all credibility and the real story, if there is one, gets buried forever." "What do we do in the meantime?" Riley asked. "You stay hidden. I'm going to check you into a different hotel, under my name. You don't use your credit cards, you don't turn on your phones except in emergencies, and you don't contact anyone from your previous life. Can you do that?" Riley thought about her shop, her customers, her business that was already on the brink. Disappearing for a week would probably finish it off. But looking at the photographs on her phone, at the faces of soldiers who'd been erased from history, she knew what her father would have done. "We can do that," she said. The week of verification. Sarah Chen worked fast. By that afternoon, she'd connected with Dr. Raymond Martinez, a World War II historian at the National Archives, and Patricia Yi, a forensic document examiner with 30 years of experience. Both agreed to fly to Coeur d'Alene immediately when Sarah described what she had. By evening, they were in a hotel conference room that Sarah had rented, examining the documents with specialized equipment. Dr. Martinez handled the military records with an almost reverent care. "The paper stock is correct for 1944, he murmured, using a magnified lamp to examine a document. The typewriter font is consistent with military-issue Underwood typewriters from that era. And these classification stamps." He looked up, his eyes wide. "If these are forgeries, they're the best I've ever seen." Patricia Yi was examining the ink with spectroscopic equipment. "The ink composition is consistent with military issue from the 1940s. I can't say definitively without lab testing, but there's no indication of modern materials." Over the next 3 days, they worked methodically through every document. Dr. Martinez cross-referenced names and unit designations with official military records. Several of the soldiers mentioned in Operation Silent Recovery documents appeared in official casualty lists, marked as Kia on the exact dates the classified documents mentioned. This one, Dr. Martinez said, holding up a photograph of a soldier. Private Joseph Martinez, no relation, 101st Airborne. Official records say he was killed on June 6, 1944, during the jump into Normandy. His family held a funeral in July 1944 in Los Angeles. But according to this document, he was found alive in that German bunker on June 9, given the false identity Robert Johnson, and died in the Philippines in August 1944. Can you verify that Robert Johnson existed? Sarah asked. Dr. Martinez pulled up a military database on his laptop. There were 17 soldiers named Robert Johnson serving in the Pacific Theater in 1944. One of them, yes, here. Robert Johnson, no middle initial, assigned to the 32nd Infantry Division, killed in action August 14, 1944, in the Philippines. No record of his service before June 1944. No enlistment papers, no training records, nothing. It's as if he materialized in the Pacific Theater with no history. Because he wasn't Robert Johnson, Sarah said quietly. He was Joseph Martinez. The evidence mounted day by day. Patricia Yee confirmed that the documents were authentic to the 1940s. Dr. Martinez verified that the military designations, locations, and dates were all historically accurate. And most damning of all, they found 12 soldiers in official casualty records who matched the names, units, and death dates in Thomas Brennan's documents, soldiers who'd been declared Kia in Normandy but whose families had received suspiciously delayed notifications, whose bodies had never been recovered, and who had no grave markers in military cemeteries. On the 4th day, Sarah received a call from a colleague at the Pentagon who specialized in military history. He'd heard rumors that Sarah was looking into World War II records. Be careful, he warned. Whatever you're working on, people are nervous. There are questions being asked about journalists who've been inquiring about Operation Overlord records. What kind of people? Sarah asked. The kind who don't like questions. Sarah, I'm serious. If this is what I think it is, if you've found evidence of the silent recovery program, you need to understand that this goes all the way up. There are still people alive who are involved in covering this up. People with power. Then it's definitely the story I need to tell, Sarah replied. On the 7th day, Dr. Martinez completed his final analysis. He sat across from Riley, Harold, and Sarah in the hotel conference room, his expression solemn. In my professional opinion, these documents are authentic records from 1944. The paper, ink, typewriter characteristics, classification stamps, military nomenclature, everything is consistent with genuine military documents from that period. The information in these documents aligns with verifiable historical events and military unit movements. And the soldiers mentioned in Operation Silent Recovery are real people whose official records contain anomalies consistent with the cover-up described in these documents. He paused, then continued. What you have here is evidence of a program that declared American soldiers dead, gave survivors false identities, and appears to have eliminated them when they became security risks. This is one of the most significant World War II discoveries in decades. Sarah looked at Riley and Harold. Are you ready for this? Once we publish, there's no going back. Harold spoke first. My brother died carrying this secret. I've spent 65 years keeping it buried. I'm ready for it to see daylight. Riley nodded. My father taught me that truth matters more than consequences. Let's do this. The story breaks. Sarah Chen's article went live on a Tuesday morning, simultaneously published by the Associated Press and 3 major newspapers. The headline read, Buried Truth, How the U.S. Army Declared Soldiers Dead, Then Killed Them to Hide Intelligence Failures. The story was comprehensive, Thomas Brennan's journal entries, excerpts from the classified documents, expert verification from Dr. Martinez and Patricia E., and most powerfully, the photographs of soldiers marked Kia alongside evidence that they'd been found alive. Sarah had included interviews with Riley and Harold, explaining how the documents were discovered and authenticated. She'd also included a powerful sidebar, a list of the 12 soldiers from the bunker, with information about their families. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the Department of Defense issued a statement denying the allegations and questioning the authenticity of the documents. But by then, Dr. Martinez had already appeared on national news, walking through his authentication process and explaining why the documents were genuine. By that afternoon, veterans organizations were demanding answers. By evening, 3 congressional representatives had called for investigations. And by the next morning, family members of the soldiers mentioned in the documents were coming forward. Maria Santos appeared on CNN, tears streaming down her face, holding a photograph of her grandfather, Private Joseph Martinez. "My grandmother died believing her husband was killed on D-Day. She remarried, had children, built a new life, but she never stopped grieving for the man she lost. And now I find out he was alive. That he survived and our government kept him from us. How do we process that?" More families came forward, each with similar stories. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren of soldiers who'd been declared dead, some holding onto old letters and photographs, all demanding answers about what had happened to their loved ones. The Pentagon's denials became less categorical. Within a week, the Department of Defense announced it was opening an official investigation into the claims. The National Archives began reviewing classified World War II documents for any evidence of Operation Silent Recovery. And then, 3 weeks after Sarah's article published, the breakthrough came. A retired Army colonel named Margaret Thornton, age 92, saw the news coverage and contacted Sarah Chen. She had something to contribute to the story. The final truth. Riley and Harold flew to Washington, D.C. to meet Colonel Thornton at Sarah's request. They met in a quiet cafe near the Pentagon, where the elderly woman sat with a folder in front of her. "My father was Colonel Richard Thornton," she began without preamble. "He was an intelligence officer at SHAEF headquarters in 1944. He was one of the people who created Operation Silent Recovery." Riley, Harold, and Sarah sat in stunned silence. "After the war, my father never spoke about his service. But in 1987, when he was dying of cancer, he gave me this." She pushed the folder across the table. "He said it was the one thing he'd done that he couldn't justify, the one decision that haunted him every day of his life." Inside the folder was a complete file on Operation Silent Recovery, official documents, memos, and a handwritten letter from Colonel Thornton explaining the program's creation. The letter was a confession. In June 1944, we discovered that German intelligence had penetrated Allied command at the highest levels. We never found the leak, never identified who was feeding information to the enemy. The 12 soldiers recovered from that bunker had been interrogated using drugs that made them reveal everything they knew. If they were repatriated and debriefed, there was a significant risk that German agents could identify them and either eliminate them or use them to verify the success of their intelligence operation. The decision was made at levels far above my authority: declare the soldiers Kia and give them new identities. Send them to theaters where they couldn't be identified by German intelligence. It was meant to protect them and protect the investigation into the security breach. But then Private Kerrigan tried to contact his family. And we realized that if one of them broke security, all of them could be compromised. So the program changed. From protecting soldiers to eliminating security risks. I objected. I filed a formal protest. I was told that national security trumped individual lives, and that 12 men were an acceptable sacrifice to protect millions. I followed orders. God forgive me, I followed orders. And those 12 men died, some in combat, but most through arranged circumstances, because we decided their lives mattered less than our secrets. I've carried this guilt for 40 years. If you're reading this, Margaret, it means I'm finally free of it. But you shouldn't have to carry it alone. The truth should come out. The families deserve to know. Those men deserve to be remembered not as casualties of war, but as casualties of our cowardice. The letter was signed and dated, with Colonel Thornton's military identification number. Saracen photographed every page, her hands shaking slightly. This is it. This is the final piece. A direct confession from someone inside the program. Colonel Margaret Thornton nodded. My father was a good man who made terrible choices during wartime. I'm not here to defend him. I'm here to make sure those 12 men, and the others like them, are finally acknowledged for what happened to them. The resolution. The publication of Colonel Thornton's confession changed everything. The Department of Defense could no longer deny or deflect. Within days, the Secretary of Defense announced a full internal investigation and promised to declassify all documents related to Operation Silent Recovery. Over the following months, the story continued to develop. The National Archives discovered additional documents confirming the program's existence. Military historians identified 47 soldiers who had been part of Silent Recovery, 12 from the original bunker, and 35 others who had been captured and declared dead rather than risk intelligence compromise. The Department of Defense established a task force to contact descendants of the affected families, offering official apologies and corrected military records. Several families filed lawsuits, which were quietly settled. Congressional hearings examined how such a program could have been authorized and how it had remained hidden for 80 years. The investigation revealed that while the program had been classified, it had never been properly archived. Documents had been deliberately destroyed or hidden in the 1950s and 60s by officials trying to cover up the cover-up. For Riley, the consequences were mixed. Her diesel repair shop in Montana closed. She couldn't maintain it while dealing with media attention and traveling for interviews. But the publicity had an unexpected benefit. A documentary production company purchased the rights to tell the story of how she discovered the documents, paying enough to clear her business debt and provide a financial cushion. More importantly, she found a new purpose. Riley began working with the National World War II Museum, helping to restore the 1943 Willis Jeep that had carried Thomas Brennan's secret for 8 decades. The restored Jeep became the centerpiece of an exhibit about Operation Silent Recovery, ensuring that Thomas's story, and the stories of the 12 soldiers, would be preserved for future generations. Harold Brennan lived to see his brother vindicated. At age 90, he attended the dedication ceremony for a memorial honoring the soldiers of Operation Silent Recovery. The memorial, erected at Arlington National Cemetery, listed all 47 names and included Thomas Brennan's name as well, recognizing him as a whistleblower who had preserved the truth at great personal cost. Harold passed away peacefully 6 months later, with Riley at his bedside. His final words were about Thomas: "He can rest now. They all can." Epilogue, 1 year later. Riley stood in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, watching visitors examine the restored 1943 Willis Jeep. A placard next to it told the story of Corporal Thomas J. Brennan and the documents he'd hidden in its frame. Saracen joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You did good work, Riley. Your father would be proud." "I just found a Jeep in a barn," Riley replied. "You're the one who told the story. We both did our part." Sarah gestured to the exhibit. "You know, I've been a journalist for 35 years. I've covered wars, corporate corruption, political scandals. But this story, this is the one I'll be remembered for. And it happened because a mechanic in Montana decided that truth mattered more than a paycheck." Riley smiled. "My father taught me that some things are worth more than money." Marcus Foster was a wise man. They stood together, watching families read about Operation Silent Recovery, watching people stop at the photographs of the 12 soldiers whose deaths had been faked and whose lives had been sacrificed. Several visitors were crying. A woman in her 70s approached Riley tentatively. "Excuse me, are you Riley Foster? The one who found the documents?" Riley nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Patricia Kerrigan. My grandfather was Private Danny Kerrigan. He was Thomas Brennan's best friend." Her voice broke. My grandmother died 10 years ago, still believing my grandfather had been killed on D-Day. She never remarried, never fully moved on. If she'd known he survived, even for just a few months, it would have meant everything to her. Riley didn't know what to say. I'm so sorry for your loss. For both losses. Patricia shook her head. Don't apologize. You gave us the truth. You gave my grandfather his name back. He's not just a name on a casualty list anymore. He's a real person with a real story, and now everyone knows he tried to come home to us. She wiped her eyes. Thank you for being brave enough to tell it. After Patricia left, Riley walked through the rest of the exhibit. Each of the 47 soldiers now had their own profile, photographs, family stories, details about their lives before the war and what had happened to them after. The exhibit had become a place of pilgrimage for descendants, a place where families could finally grieve properly and honor their loved ones. One profile caught Riley's eye, Private Thomas Chen, 82nd Airborne, one of the 12 from the bunker. According to the updated information, Thomas Chen had been given the false identity William Parker and sent to the Pacific Theater. He'd died in combat in the Philippines in October 1944, aged 23. His family in San Francisco had held a funeral in July 1944, believing he'd died on D-Day. But the exhibit included a new detail that historians had recently discovered. Before Thomas Chen was killed in the Philippines, he'd managed to send a single letter to his sister, using his real name but a fake return address. The letter had been confiscated by military censors and never delivered. It had sat in a classified file for 80 years. The museum had obtained permission to display the letter. Riley read it, her throat tight. Dear Mei-Ling, I know you think I'm dead. I know Mom and Dad held a funeral for me. But I'm alive, and I need you to know that. I can't explain why they said I was killed. I can't explain where I've been or what they've done to me. They told me if I contact family, they'll court-martial me, maybe worse. But I had to try. I had to let you know I'm thinking about you. If you ever get this letter, please tell Mom and Dad I love them. Tell them I tried to come home. Tell them I never stopped fighting to get back to you. I don't know if I'll survive this war now. They've sent me somewhere far away, given me a different name, treated me like I'm someone else. But I'm still Tommy. I'm still your brother. And I died loving you, even if you never know it. Your brother, Thomas. Riley had to turn away, overwhelmed by emotion. 80 years ago, a young man had risked everything to tell his sister he was alive, and his message had been buried by people who valued secrecy over humanity. It gets to you, doesn't it? Sarah said softly, appearing beside her again. Every time I read one of these stories, I remember why we do this work. Why truth matters, even when it's painful. I keep thinking about my father, Riley admitted. About what he would say if he could see all this. He spent his whole life fixing engines, solving mechanical problems. But he taught me that some problems can't be fixed, they can only be witnessed and remembered. Your father was right. Sarah gestured to the visitors moving through the exhibit, reading stories, taking photographs, wiping tears. This is how we prevent it from happening again. By remembering. By refusing to let the truth stay buried. The unexpected discovery. 3 months later, Riley received a call from Dr. Martinez at the National Archives. His voice was excited, almost breathless. Riley, we found something. We've been going through declassified OSS records, and we discovered a file that was misfiled back in 1946. It's about the intelligence breach that led to Operation Silent Recovery. You found out who was leaking information to the Germans. Better than that. We found out there was no leak. Riley sat down, confused. What do you mean? The Germans didn't have a spy in Allied command. What they had was a brilliant intelligence officer named Klaus Hoffmann who specialized in deductive analysis. He studied Allied troop movements, supply shipments, weather patterns, and radio traffic. He made educated guesses about when and where the invasion would happen. He was right about Normandy, but wrong about half the details. The Allies assumed his partial accuracy meant he had inside information, but he didn't. He was just extremely good at his job. So Operation Silent Recovery was based on a false assumption? Exactly. Those 12 soldiers were declared dead and ultimately killed because of an intelligence failure on our side. We couldn't believe the Germans could deduce our plans without a spy, so we assumed there must be a spy. We sacrificed American soldiers to protect against a breach that never existed. Riley felt sick. Does this mean? It means those men died for nothing, Dr. Martinez said quietly. They died because we were paranoid and because we couldn't admit our plans weren't as secret as we thought. It's even worse than we initially believed. The revelation made headlines again. The Pentagon issued another apology, this one acknowledging that Operation Silent Recovery had been based on flawed intelligence assessments. Several military historians published papers examining how institutional paranoia and pride had led to the unnecessary deaths of American soldiers. For Riley, this final revelation brought a strange kind of closure. The story wasn't just about a cover-up, it was about how fear and certainty can lead good people to make terrible decisions. It was a cautionary tale for every generation. Moving forward, Riley never returned to Montana permanently. She sold her father's shop to a young mechanic who promised to keep the Foster name on the building. With the money from the documentary and from consulting work with the museum, she established the Marcus Foster Memorial Fund, a scholarship program for young women pursuing careers in diesel mechanics and automotive repair. She moved to Portland, Oregon, close to Saracen, and the two became close friends. Riley took a position at a technical college, teaching diesel mechanics while continuing to work with the museum on World War II vehicle restorations. The 1943 Willys Jeep remained the centerpiece of the Operation Silent Recovery exhibit, but Riley arranged for a second Jeep, one she restored herself, to travel to schools and communities, accompanied by educational materials about the importance of transparency and accountability in government. Harold's property in Montana was preserved by a veterans organization and converted into a memorial park dedicated to Thomas Brennan. The barn where the documents were found became a small museum, telling the story of how a young corporal had tried to do the right thing and how his attempt had been vindicated 80 years later. The last letter. 2 years after the story broke, Riley received a package with no return address. Inside was a letter, handwritten on yellowed paper, in a small military medal, a bronze star. The letter read, "Dear Miss Foster, you don't know me, but I knew your father. I served with Marcus Foster in the Army in the 1970s. He was a good man who taught me that integrity matters more than rank. I'm sending you this medal because it belonged to my uncle, Captain Robert Harrison. He was the officer who discovered the bunker in France in 1944. He was also the officer who reported the discovery to his superiors and recommended the 12 soldiers be properly repatriated. His recommendation was overruled by higher command. He was ordered to implement Operation Silent Recovery and told that refusal would be considered insubordination during wartime, a capital offense. He followed orders, but it destroyed him. He drank himself to death in 1952, age 37. Before he died, he told me everything. He made me promise to keep his bronze star as a reminder that medals and honor don't mean anything if you compromise your principles to earn them. He said that if the truth ever came out, I should give the medal to whoever had the courage to tell it. That's you, Miss Foster. You had the courage my uncle lacked. You chose truth over security, just like your father would have. Captain Harrison's story isn't widely known, but I wanted you to know he wasn't a villain. He was a 26-year-old officer who made an impossible choice during wartime, and he paid for it with the rest of his life. Thank you for giving all those soldiers, and the officers who struggled with what they were ordered to do, a measure of peace. Respectfully, Colonel James Harrison, Ret. Riley held the bronze star, feeling its weight. She thought about Captain Harrison, about Thomas Brennan, about all the people who'd been broken by secrets they'd been forced to keep. She added the medal to the museum exhibit, along with the letter, as a reminder that Operation Silent Recovery had destroyed not just the 12 soldiers, but countless others who'd been forced to participate in or conceal the truth. Final reflections. On the third anniversary of discovering the documents, Riley returned to Mercer's Hollow for the first time since leaving. She visited her father's grave, laying fresh flowers on the headstone. "I think you'd be proud, Dad," she said quietly. "I found something broken and I fixed it. Not an engine this time, something more important. Truth. Justice. Memory." She visited Harold's grave next, in the cemetery on his property. The headstone read, "Harold Brennan, 1935 to 2027. Brother, veteran, keeper of truth." "You can rest now, Harold," Riley said. "Thomas's story is told. The secret's out. And because of what you did, 47 families finally have answers." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Riley walked through the memorial park that had been Harold's property. Families were there, descendants of the silent recovery soldiers, reading plaques and sharing stories. One family had brought a young boy, perhaps 8 years old. His great-great-grandfather had been one of the 12. The boy was reading the plaque about Private Joseph Martinez, sounding out the difficult words. "Was he brave?" the boy asked his grandmother. "Yes," she answered. "He was very brave. And the woman who made sure we'd remember him was brave too." The boy looked around. "Is she here?" Riley was close enough to hear, but she didn't step forward. This wasn't about her. This was about the soldiers, about the families, about making sure that what happened would never happen again. She walked back to her rental car, ready to return to Portland, to her teaching job, to her new life. But she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to let the truth stay buried. In her truck, still reliable after all these years, Riley found an old photograph she'd kept, her father, Harold, and a much younger Riley, standing in front of Foster and daughter Diesel Repair. 3 people who'd believed in honest work, in integrity, in doing the right thing even when it cost you. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. "For teaching me what matters." As she drove away from Mercer's Hollow for the last time, Riley thought about the journey that had started with a simple barn cleanup job. She'd been offered $200 to haul junk. Instead, she'd uncovered one of the most significant military scandals in American history. But more than that, she'd given 47 soldiers back their stories, given 47 families back their truth, and ensured that Thomas Brennan's sacrifice had finally meant something. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones buried deepest. And sometimes it takes someone with the courage to dig, even when everyone else wants to leave things buried.